Hello again, I am Blunty, and hey look there, you don't have to wait until the Nintendo Switch version of Skyrim launches later this year if you want to take Skyrim on the road with you. Or for that matter, a whole massive pile of other games from Game Boy to AAA PC. What you're looking at here is the Gpd Win, a surprisingly rad little gizmo that GearBest sent in for me to check out. Now, a few years ago, there was a thing called the Gpd Xd, and it was an Android-based system, and much like the Gpd Win here, it was very similar in style, size, and layout to a Nintendo 3DS XL. And by all reports, the XD was an interesting concept, but not especially well done as a device. But this, the Gpd Win, while it looks quite similar, you may have guessed by now, as the name suggested to you, also the fact that you're watching me fumble about in Skyrim with it, is an entirely different monster altogether. It is a fully functioning, legit Windows 10 running beastie. And no, I don't mean one of those weird cut-down versions of Windows 10 that you see crammed onto phones or tablets with ARM processors on them or something. I mean the same full-fat 64-bit Windows 10 my big boy PC runs. Because inside here is an Intel Cherry Trail Z8700 quad-core 1.6GHz CPU. And the Cherry Trail Z8700 CPU is a full x86 chip, just like the one in your desktop PC. And it is, as you may imagine, in a device like this, an ultra-low voltage platform, so your battery doesn't implode instantly, but it still does have Intel's Turbo Boost technology, which gives it the ability to ramp up its clock speed to deliver extra power dynamically when you need it, and slow itself right down again when you don't need it, so it maximizes your battery life. And we'll come back to the matter of battery life. Of course, in a package this small, there's no discrete GPU, so you're dealing with the onboard Intel HD 405 GPU, but as you're seeing, while you are likely to be turning many beefier games' graphics settings down to low settings, it can absolutely run things like Skyrim just fine. In the case of Injustice Gods Amongst Us, I did have to drop the resolution down a bit from the native 720p screen, so that's why you're seeing it in a window box sort of display here. The issue wasn't really power, as much as it was that I was getting some stuttering and sputtering because of video memory requirements at high resolutions. On the matter of the screen though, it is a 5.5-inch IPS panel 5-point touchscreen 1280 by 720, that it is really quite nice indeed, at least in controlled lighting conditions, indoors, or even on a train. But out under a bright blue sky, well, the camera exaggerates the amount of reflection. It doesn't look this bad to the human eye, but it's actually not too hard to position it so the reflections on the glossy screen aren't a huge issue. But it is the brightness that holds it back here. It is just not quite bright enough to avoid being drowned out by direct sunlight. It is maybe 60% as bright as the maximum brightness on my iPhone 7 Plus, for example. Not a deal breaker by any means, but it is worth noting. Otherwise, the screen is very vivid, very crisp, and 720p at 5.5 inches is about the limit for making Windows usable. Any smaller, or any higher res for that matter, and text would be ridiculously tiny. As it stands, the default interface scaling is just at the place where less than perfect peepers may squint a bit. But again, you're not really likely going to be doing regular office work duties here. So long as it's serviceable enough to get your stuff set up and loaded, it's fine. And indeed, it is absolutely fine for that job. There's 4GB of LPGDDR3 RAM, which, while not much by today's standards, should be quite sufficient for the duties asked of a device like this, given its CPU capabilities anyway. It has 64GB of onboard storage, but you can expand this at will using micro SD cards. In fact, the Steam games I'm showing you, even Skyrim, are installed on a micro SD card, and I've seen no detriment to performance or issues with load times. There is a mini HDMI output on the back for output to a monitor, or TV, or projector, or whatever, and an audio jack for headsets. There's a USB Type-C connector, which is also how you charge the battery, and a standard USB for connecting peripherals, either directly or through a USB hub, for example, if you're at a desk with a full-size keyboard and mouse. And for connectivity, there's 802.11 ABG and AC Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.1. You're all set up there. Underneath the device, you'll find a switch for manual control over the fan, so when you're in low-demand situations, it can be utterly silent with the fan off. And there are two other speed settings. The mid setting is quite subtle, and the max setting is a bit louder, but still fairly easily drowned out by gaming audio, for example, even without headphones on. And back on the front side, there's a full keyboard. It is, of course, tiny, and the keys are quite stiff to prevent accidental activation while in use. And while you won't exactly be taking notes on this thing in meetings or something like that, it is more than serviceable for common, frequent, short text input. So while web surfing, or indeed naming a character in games and stuff like that. Down the right side, there are some specialist keys, including Start, Select, an Xbox button, functionally the same as the center button on an Xbox controller, of course, L3 and R3 buttons, not super convenient or easy to use in-game, but you do still get the thumbstick click functionality that would have otherwise been missing from the low-profile analog sticks, so it's nice to have them all the same. And of course, that brings us to the integrated Gamepad, replicating full functionality of a standard gamepad, well, except for rumble. And although the shoulder and trigger buttons are not super ergonomic, and frankly feel a bit sort of loose and wibbly, there's also no analog on the triggers, making racing games a bit more awkward. They are, other than that, quite functional. The analog sticks themselves have a reasonably good feel to them, a good range of movement, the dead zone is nicely weighted, and the tactility is pretty okay. I may have liked a little more texture on the surface for grip, but they're not exactly slippery as it stands. The face buttons really are quite nice, good tactile feel and feedback to the action, responsive, a good balance of size and spacing. Even the D-pad, which at first seems like it'll be a bit mushy, just from the immediate feel of it, is in fact usefully responsive. But the cleverest trick to all of this, though, is that switch in the center. In one position, it makes these controls read to Windows as an X input device, an Xbox controller in other words, which is what you'll be using for most games. But if you're digging into your archive for some older games, there's also the far left position of the switch, which now makes the controls read as the older direct input style controller. And when it's in the center position, you get mouse emulation, which of course, alongside the touchscreen, is what makes Windows even usable in the first place. Now, it's not as elegant as an actual mouse or laptop touchpad, of course, but very workable nonetheless, at least after a short adjustment period. The right stick becomes your cursor control, the left and right shoulder buttons become the left and right mouse buttons respectively, and the left thumbstick is a scroll wheel. There's even a button for middle click. This arrangement not only makes Windows fully navigatable, but even works in games that default to mouse input, or even in the case of Minecraft, only accept mouse and keyboard input. Because rather cleverly, in the mouse mode, not only do the thumbsticks act as mouse inputs, but they've mapped the WASD keys to the D-pad. Clever! Again, this arrangement is never going to be as good as a regular keyboard and mouse, of course, but in many games, like Minecraft and Stardew Valley here, which both use this input style completely differently, it will certainly be enough. The Gpd Win also lends itself quite naturally to being a handheld classic system emulator, of course, with enough power to run pretty much everything perfectly right up to the Nintendo 64, or even Smash Brothers was lovely and playable. PlayStation ran without issue even, and while PSP emulation needed a little bit of tweaking and cajoling to get running smooth, but even it was reaching acceptable playable performance. Didn't expect that. Feeling bold, I did try GameCube, and no, that's where the line is. I got 50 to 60% speed emulation with Dolphin, no matter what I tried in the settings, which renderer I was using, all that kind of stuff. GameCube emulation is the line in the sand right there. So what I've done now is plugged in my web camera to the USB port on the back and set up a basic OBS scene to find out whether this thing has enough grunt to actually encode video on the fly for streaming. Now, of course, with the level of power we have available to us in this thing, you're not going to be running Skyrim and OBS side by side and streaming a sophisticated Twitch stream out there, but for a super portable little device, you can just hook a webcam in and some headphones on like I have done here and sort of stream to Twitch or indeed YouTube or Facebook if you choose as well. It's working really quite well, and you can do a lot more sophisticated things with it than you can from streaming direct from a phone, for example. You can set up a whole bunch of scenes, and everything you can do with OBS on a desktop computer you can do here. You have to keep in mind at how much CPU you're using. You can't get super fancy and have a bunch of stuff on screen at the same time, I don't think, but you can certainly get away. Oh, my battery's running low. You can certainly get away with doing a Pokemon stream, for example, running Pokemon in an emulator here, and it seems to be keeping up with that just fine. I'm only using about half the CPU. I'm at 52, 56% CPU usage right now. I'm running at 30 frames per second just fine, flawlessly. No skip frames, no drop frames or anything like that. So, for a little streaming rig even, this thing is just baller. Look at it go. 56, 50. I know we spiked up to about 74% CPU usage. Yeah, we're still well under 100% CPU usage doing all this OBS stuff, encoding video, running an emulator, running the web camera, doing the little text above me there as well. And it's just, this thing is awesome. And it doesn't even stop there, because the GPD Win also functions as a remarkably pleasant way to use Steam's in-home streaming to pull games running on my big fat desktop gaming rig PC across to something I can now curl up in bed with. Here it ran nice and smooth and looked pretty fantastic, it must be said. Wi-Fi was absolutely reliable, and between the fancy graphics my GTX 1080 churns out and the sharp, vivid screen on the GPD Win, it was in fact a far better experience than I'd anticipated. So, what we have here is a remarkable little device, a fully functional, fully capable Windows gaming PC-ish in something as pocketable as a 3DS XL. Which is to say, it will fit in a pocket, but you'll be more comfortable slipping it into a bag. It'll do everything from retro gaming, even reaching into the shadow of AAA PC gaming, and makes a lovely Steam companion device. In general, the build feels quite nice, the fit and finish seems tight and well manufactured, the feel of the plastics isn't quite up to Nintendo's handheld standards perhaps, but everything else seems good. The hinge has a nice solid weighty feel to it, the keys and buttons all feel good, with the only exception of being those slightly wiggly shoulder buttons. The speakers are uninspiring, as you may imagine from tiny little speakers. They are serviceable, but they are also hindered by placement. I often would muffle the speakers with the palm of my right hand while playing a game. Not the smartest place to put the speaker grill, but you can use this in your headphones, so there you go. And performance-wise, it kind of blew me away, even when it comes to battery. You'd be expecting, perhaps, to nuke the battery in like 20 minutes flat, right? Well, it's a 6900 mAh lithium-ion battery, and in fact, in lighter Windows desktop-based use, Twitter, web surfing, all that kind of stuff, I got all the way up to 5 hours of use out of it pretty friggin' easily. Very respectable indeed. Under gaming loads, of course, it can vary much wider, depending on what you're asking of it and how hard it's working. I mean, it's easy to imagine that Skyrim may drain your battery a little bit quicker than Stardew Valley, for example. But regardless of circumstance, it still was far better on battery life than I'd expected. Same goes for temperatures. While it does, of course, get warm while under extended loads, it never got to a place I'd be prepared to call hot in my hands. And monitoring system temps while testing and benchmarking stuff, I saw it reach temps into the low 60s. The GPD Win really is quite an exceptional little critter. I have to admit, what I was expecting was build quality like oh so many other 3DS-style copycat devices that have come and gone throughout the years. I was expecting an average screen with clumsy touch input. I was expecting sloppy, laggy gamepad controls, and I was expecting a barely useful battery life. What I got was a very pleasant surprise in all of those fronts. It is, in fact, a device made with quite obvious care and thought and intent to make something really quite head and shoulders above the countless random Chinese Windows 10 tablets and ultra-portables that have unstoppably flooded the online marketplaces throughout the last few years. The GPD Win is instead a device I intend to roll into my personal use. It'll make a wonderful gaming companion while travelling. Between it and the Nintendo Switch, it'll be a friggin' killer combo for that. Or indeed, remote playing my high-end AAA Steam games while curled up in bed. Winter is coming after all. Hell, it could even be an ultra-compact way to manage backing up my camera media while I'm travelling too. With the exception of video editing, it could take the place of the laptop I normally travel with for that purpose. Now, it's not perfect, but absolutely very impressive indeed. And right now, by the way, it's listing on Gearbest at a sniff under $340, which, considering its capabilities and wild flexibility, I am calling a friggin' bargain. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. Be pleasantly surprised, and I will catch you next time.